It's time for another look through a classic Doctor Who annual. This is the annual from 1985, which was published a few months after the Twin Dilemma aired. So I thought I'd take a look through it and see if any of the writers had actually watched the latest episodes, or if it was just a bunch of generic Doctor Who stories as usual. The first story is Battle Planet. Perry here is dressed as if she's gone for a job interview. She was never covered up that much on screen. There is a bit of banter at the start. The Doctor looks about him, casting a slightly perturbed glance at the endless fields around the TARDIS. "All right, Doctor," said Perry in a resigned tone. "Where are we this time?" "Well, according to the TARDIS, we should be on XR3, replied the Doctor. "But this looks nothing like I remember it." "Typical," muttered Perry under her breath. "What did you say?" asked the Doctor, only half listening. "It looks like Earth," said Perry. "Oh no," said the Doctor. "The TARDIS isn't that far off course." So there's a bit of banter there, but nothing that really screams Sixth Doctor. Anyway, they get knocked out by these strange alien creatures. They've been kidnapped by Raynon, the guardian of the D-Bands, and he explains why they need him. "We are at war with the Cyros, who share our planet. They want full control over our sister planets, Lowstar and Crystar, and they will destroy us to get it. All the secrets of those planets are absorbed in a blue rock that is kept in the Tower of Selsor. The Cyros have seized it, and it is entombed in the Crypt of Pymo," which sounds like a very complicated Dungeons and Dragons scenario, if you ask me. So the Doctor and Perry make their way through the war zone, with various aliens blowing each other to bits around them, and they finally reach the blue rock, which they are clearly very pleased to see. Anyway, they take it back to Raynon with not much bother, and they leave the planet. I was expecting some sort of twist in the tail, like Raynon turning out to be the bad guy, but it's all very straightforward. Still, the illustrations are nice enough. Next, we get a feature on the Doctor Who set designer, Tony Burrow, which explains all the stages of designing and building the sets. And it's all illustrated by some very nice photographs of sets from recent stories in the series. So it's not a bad little feature, the sort of thing you might get in Doctor Who magazine nowadays. Next is Day of the Dragon, which has Perry back in her Caves of Androzani costume. The artist clearly had a lot of fun drawing that. It starts with a murder mystery, with the Doctor and Perry investigating the burnt corpse of Colonel Lathan, who they were in the middle of visiting for reasons unspecified. But the vaguely Agatha Christie feel is soon dispelled as the culprit turns out to be a 50-foot dragon called Quaylar the Great, Master of Fire. Not sure how he managed to get in the house, but the illustrations are certainly impressive, and he would not have looked nearly that good in live action. Quaylar starts to burn everything in sight, so the Doctor tries to come up with a clever way of defeating him, but in the end he decides to just turn on all the gas taps in the laboratory, and the entire house blows up, taking Quaylar with it. A bit of an extreme solution, but certainly effective. The Real Hereward is a historical adventure set shortly after the Battle of Hastings. Unusually, it starts from the viewpoint of a group of Saxon rebels who are fleeing from the Normans, and they come across the Doctor and Perry when they take shelter at an inn. Their leader is Hereward the Wake, an old English folk hero who is kind of an earlier version of Robin Hood. In this story, he turns out to be King Harold in disguise. But according to Wikipedia, there's no historical evidence for that theory, so the writer of this story must have just made that up. Anyway, a group of Norman soldiers besiege the inn, but the Doctor manages to drive them away using a toy robot. The Normans outside heard nothing at first, suspicious of the cottage in the marshes for no reason other than boredom at their posts. They were nevertheless sniffing towards it like dogs. The cottage was small, and so it was not long before they reached the door again. There were 8 of them, brave men, but there was a terrified scream, then another, and a third, and the sound of running footsteps growing fainter in the distance, while outside a metallic voice was saying repeatedly, "I am Martin, the Metal Marvel. I can do all sorts of things. I am pleased that we are friends. I am Martin." They have gone, said the Doctor, peering outside, grabbing the robot and shaking it into submission. Those trained soldiers very easily frightened away. But yeah, it's an interesting story. It might not be historically accurate, but it's a bit of fun. The Deadly Ouigi is next, and no, it's not about the dangers of cannabis. The Doctor visits his old friend Varma, a Time Lord who has somehow managed to take over an entire solar system. I'm pretty sure that's against the rules, but he seems quite benevolent, so I guess the Doctor just lets it slide. The planet has been invaded by an alien weed that turns everything it touches into killer robots. It's never explained exactly how. I guess it could be nanobots or something. Anyway, there's a big battle between humans and robots, lots of deaths, lots of robots blowing up, and finally the robot base blows up and everyone is saved. So that's definitely consistent with the levels of violence in the programme at the time. Vorton's revenge begins with the TARDIS being pulled to another barren alien planet. It seems to happen a lot. Vorton turns out to be an old enemy of the Time Lords. Realization dawned in the Doctor's mind. Of course! You and your people were condemned by the Time Lords for your attacks on neighbouring planets and attempts to take possession of them. They launched a full-scale attack on your planet and devastated it. Exactly! The voice of Vorton was full of venom. Our planet is dead. We are forced to live in caves and feed on what vegetation we can find. But we have not been idle. We have spent our time building a new spacecraft, one that is far superior to any we have built before, and weapons that are strong enough to destroy the most powerful nation, with what resources were left to us. We are ready to launch it, and plan to avenge ourselves by destroying the Time Lords. There was triumph in his voice now. You, Doctor, will use our communication system to inform the Time Lords of our peace treaty with you, and that we would like to come in peace to their planet. They trust you. They will not be prepared for an attack, and we will strike them while they are powerless. So it's basically the same plan as Invasion of Time, but sadly Vorton is even more incompetent than the Vardans were, and this spaceship just blows up without the Doctor doing anything. So the problem basically takes care of itself. Next we get a feature on special effects, with some very nice photographs dotted throughout, including canines inside, the model of Warrior's Gate there, and I think that's meant to be the Merker. I always thought there were two people inside that, but maybe not. Still, there's a lot of detail, so it's a good feature. Next we have the Time Savers, which is the longest story in the book, at 10 pages long. It starts with the Doctor summoned to Gallifrey by the Time Lords. The Doctor aimed a desultory kick at the delicate controls of the TARDIS and sat down on the floor, pulling his hat forward over his face and glowering at the instrument panel. Hang on, his hat? What hat? This Doctor doesn't wear a hat. It's almost as if this story was written for the Fifth Doctor and changed at the last minute. Doctor, the deep voice of the Lord President greeted him. Please be seated. A place has been prepared for you. What? Said the Doctor in a tone of mild surprise. The 24 admit another into their ranks. The need must be great. The need is great, Doctor, and we have no time to waste. I will come straight to the point. We need your help. That is why we have brought you here. The Doctor smiled to himself. The Council of Time Lords admitting that it needed his help? Okay, that is more in character with the Sixth Doctor, to be fair. It turns out that somebody is interfering with time. They dispatch him to Earth in 1996, where somebody is conducting time experiments. They meet an old tramp who's drunk on methylated spirits, who tells them that they're in Cambridge. So I guess he could just be a student. They trace the time distortions to the Arthur Jeffries building. I'm not sure if that's a real place or not. Where Professor Thomas is building a time machine. Then the Master shows up. It turns out he's been exiled to Earth since the Doctor stole his TARDIS's time rotor. I'm not entirely sure when this is supposed to have happened. It could have been in one of the Third Doctor stories, and this is the Roger Delgado version of the Master. But the Master's timeline is so complicated, for all we know it could be Sacha Dhawan. Anyway, time travellers from 300 years in the future come back in time, destroy the machine, and wipe themselves out of existence. This was released before the Terminator came out, so it couldn't have been a rip-off. But this is probably the best story in the book. It develops nicely, it's got some twists and turns, and the Doctor feels a lot more like his TV self than in the other stories. Take the ending, for example. Peri opened the TARDIS door. "Where now?" she asked. "The time disruption has been corrected, although we didn't actually correct it." "Oh, I don't know," said the Doctor modestly. "I think our presence probably delayed the Master long enough for the Ypsilon men to get there. We can certainly report back to Gallifrey that the job was well done. That is, if the TARDIS doesn't develop a little quirk in its directional coordinates and take us to Palawan by mistake. Lovely beaches they've got there." Peri smiled to herself as the TARDIS vanished into the cold September night. Finally, we have the Mystery of the Rings. A very nice illustration of the Doctor and Peri smiling into the camera. This one spends the first 2 pages on the Doctor going shopping for a screwdriver, which feels like padding, but there is some nice prose involved. It was indeed cold. It was one of those autumn mornings where the whole of the world seems frosty and cold, and where leaves and twigs crunch underfoot. The sky was pinkish blue, and even the last remaining fingers of sunlight seemed cold. Peri thrust her hands deep into her pockets and shivered. Turns out aliens from the planet Valjark are hypnotising young people and luring them to a stone circle, although it's not a sequel to the Stones of Blood. The Doctor tricks the aliens into revealing their true selves. Peering through the twigs for the bushes in which she crouched, she saw the villagers draw back, horror on their faces. Twisting herself, she saw the aliens, their silver loveliness vanished as if it had never been. They were hideous, their faces grimacing and leering evilly, their bodies hunched and bent, the colour of putty. Then, even as she looked, they began to fade away, to dissolve into the air as though they were dreams. Finally, they were gone. So yeah, as usual, the aliens are defeated with very little bother. And that's about it. All of the stories are pretty basic. Some are better written than others, but certainly none what you would call essential. The Doctor and Peri are a bit generic throughout, and apart from a few nice moments of characterisation, it could be just about any Doctor-companion pairing. And there's no puzzles or games to break things up, just the 2 behind-the-scenes features. But to be fair, they are pretty decent. There was one more annual the following year. That's quite expensive to get hold of, so I'll probably skip that one. But when I get to the 21st century, I do plan on covering the annuals that tie into the new series, which apparently contains stories written by the actual writers of the TV show, like Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat. So that should be a whole different level to the stories in these annuals. So thank you for watching. Press subscribe to see more of my 6th Doctor coverage, and I'll see you next time.